Maya Johnson wasn't what most people pictured when they thought of Delta Force. At 45, her fiver frame carried the quiet confidence of someone who had seen the worst humanity had to offer and emerged stronger. Her deep brown eyes, though warm when she smiled, held the watchful alertness that 2 decades of special operations had ingrained. She'd served in places most Americans couldn't pronounce, led missions that would remain classified for generations, and saved more lives than she cared to count. Now retired, she wore that history like an invisible armor. Her natural hair, finally allowed to grow out after years of military regulations, framed a face that had learned to mask every emotion. The small scar above her right eyebrow, a souvenir from an operation in Kazakhstan, was the only visible hint of her former life. Her hands, though capable of disabling an armed opponent in seconds, now spent most days tending to her prized roses or preparing meals for neighborhood gatherings. Those who knew Maya's background often wondered why she'd chosen to retire here, in this quiet suburb outside Atlanta. They didn't understand that after 20 years of shadows and silence, of midnight missions and split-second decisions, all she wanted was the simple pleasure of watching the sun rise over her own piece of land. The house on Maple Drive had called to her the moment she saw it, a Victorian-style home with a wraparound porch and enough garden space to realize her dreams of growing her own food. The neighborhood was diverse families of all backgrounds sharing weekend barbecues and holiday celebrations. For the first time since she was 18, Maya felt like she could truly exhale. She threw herself into civilian life with the same dedication she'd once applied to military operations. Her garden became the talk of the neighborhood, with carefully planned beds of vegetables interspersed with flowering plants that attracted butterflies and hummingbirds. She taught self-defense classes at the local community center, carefully modifying her lethal skill set into something that could empower rather than harm. On weekends, her porch became a gathering spot where neighbors shared coffee and conversation. The first incident seemed minor, a crude racial slur keyed into her car one Tuesday morning. Maya photographed the damage, filed a police report, and had it repaired without fanfare. Her neighbors were outraged on her behalf, but she assured them it was probably just bored teenagers. 20 years of ops had taught her to choose her battles carefully. But then came the letters. Anonymous at first, filled with threats and historical ignorance, demanding she know her place and leave the neighborhood. They escalated to pictures of her house taken from different angles, implications that she was being watched. Maya recognized psychological warfare when she saw it. She documented everything meticulously, building a case file as thoroughly as she had for military operations. The local police were sympathetic but limited in what they could do without concrete evidence. Maya attended community board meetings, worked with her neighborhood watch, and installed security cameras. She followed every legal channel available, even as the incidents escalated. Her garbage cans were overturned, hate symbols appeared on her sidewalk, and her mail began disappearing. Through it all, Maya maintained her routine. She continued teaching her classes, tending her garden, and hosting Sunday gatherings. But beneath her calm exterior, her tactical mind was working. She noted patterns in the incidents, tracked timestamps, and began building profiles of suspicious vehicles that appeared too regularly on her street. She installed hidden cameras beyond her property line, gathered license plate numbers, and quietly compiled intelligence on local hate groups. When she identified the Pure Heritage Society as the likely culprit, she didn't react. Instead, she began mapping their organization with the same precision she'd once used to plan hostage rescues. She tracked their online presence through dummy accounts, documented their members' routines, and slowly built a comprehensive picture of their operations. The tension in the neighborhood grew palpable. Other families of color reported similar harassment, though none as sustained as what Maya faced. Community meetings became heated as residents demanded action. The Pure Heritage Society grew bolder, holding rallies just outside the neighborhood boundaries, their Confederate flags and hateful slogans a clear message of intimidation. Maya watched it all with the patience of a skilled operative. She knew from experience that enemies often revealed their vulnerabilities when they felt most powerful. As fall turned to winter, she sensed the escalation coming. The society's leaders, emboldened by their apparent impunity, began making more public appearances. Their rhetoric grew more violent, their threats more specific. Through it all, Maya maintained her cover as simply another resident trying to live in peace. But behind her carefully cultivated facade, she was preparing for the inevitable confrontation. She'd learned long ago that peace sometimes had to be defended with careful planning and precise action. As Christmas approached and tensions reached a breaking point, she knew it was only a matter of time before the society made their big move. They had no idea they were playing directly into her hands. They came at 3 a.m, when the neighborhood slept its deepest. Maya was away, attending a veteran support group meeting 2 towns over a detail they'd carefully noted in their surveillance. The attack was methodical, clearly planned over weeks. First, they cut the power to disable the security cameras they could see. Then came the bricks through every window, the sound of shattering glass muffled by the winter wind. 6 men in dark clothing moved with practiced efficiency, spraying hateful symbols across her pristine walls. They didn't just destroy, they desecrated. Family photos were torn from walls, their frames crushed underfoot. Her grandfather's Purple Heart from World War II was stolen, along with other military honors she'd kept displayed. The garden took the worst of it. They poured chemicals on the soil she'd carefully tended for years, ensuring nothing would grow there again for seasons to come. The Japanese maple she'd planted in memory of fallen comrades was cut down, its trunk spray painted with a swastika. Her prized roses were ripped from the earth, their beds salted. They even poisoned the bird feeders, leaving dead songbirds scattered across her lawn like macabre warnings. Inside, they found her library books on military history, social justice, and community building. These they burned in her bathtub, leaving scorch marks on the porcelain. Her kitchen, where she'd hosted countless community dinners, was devastated. They didn't just break dishes, they contaminated her food stores with bleach and other chemicals. Every room bore testament to their hatred, every surface marked with their ignorance. But Maya discovered the destruction at dawn. She'd driven through the night to return early, some sixth sense warning her something was wrong. The sight stopped her at the end of her driveway. For 30 seconds she stood absolutely still, her training automatically cataloguing every detail, every footprint, every spray paint pattern. The neighbors found her standing in what remained of her garden, her face a mask of controlled fury. Mrs. Chen from next door was crying, trying to clean one of the walls. Others were already calling police, insurance companies, contractors. But Maya barely heard them. She was processing the scene with the cold efficiency that had kept her alive in war zones. Only those who knew her best would have noticed the slight tremor in her left hand, not from fear, but from the effort of containing her rage. This wasn't just an attack on her property. It was an attempt to erase her identity, to destroy the peace she'd built here. They hadn't just vandalized a house, they'd violated a warrior's sanctuary. As the police took statements and gathered evidence, Maya began her own investigation. Her hidden cameras, the ones they hadn't known about, had captured everything. High-resolution images showed faces, vehicles, distinctive clothing. Her military-grade surveillance system, disguised as ordinary garden lights, had recorded their conversations. She spent the next 48 hours in her temporary safe house, analyzing data. Vehicle registrations were cross-referenced with social media profiles. Facial recognition software, borrowed through old military contacts, identified 8 individuals. Their patterns emerged: regular meeting places, favorite bars, workplace routines. She mapped their network, identifying key players and weak links. The Pure Heritage Society had made a critical mistake. They'd assumed she was just another victim, someone who would be broken by their display of force. They hadn't wondered why someone with her background had chosen this particular house, this specific neighborhood. They never questioned why her security had been so easy to bypass. Maya's planning was precise. She created detailed dossiers on each participant, mapping their vulnerabilities. Financial records revealed hidden debts. Surveillance showed extramarital affairs. Social media posts exposed criminal activities. Each piece of information became a weapon in her arsenal. She gave herself 3 days to prepare. The first day for gathering resources, calling in favors from her Delta Force days. The second for setting up surveillance and escape routes. The third for rehearsing scenarios, planning contingencies. Every move was calculated, every possible response anticipated. They had tried to destroy her home. Now she would dismantle their entire world, not with violence, but with the surgical precision that had made her one of Delta Force's most effective operatives. The operation was about to begin. Maya's infiltration began not with brute force, but with information. Using skills honed across decades of covert operations, she created a digital trail that positioned her as a sympathetic insider at a partner organization 2 states away. A few carefully placed comments in their online forums, some strategically shared posts, and within days she had their attention. The Pure Heritage Society prided themselves on vetting new members, but their process was laughably easy to circumvent for someone of Maya's experience. She fed them a backstory they couldn't resist: a disgruntled former government employee with access to sensitive databases. The society's leadership, eager for more tools to harass their targets, welcomed her digital persona with open arms. Through encrypted chats and private forums, Maya mapped their entire network. She identified their funding sources, their political connections, their methods of recruiting and radicalizing new members. Each piece of information was carefully documented and backed up on secure servers. But more importantly, she began to understand their weaknesses, the fracture lines running through their organization. Some members were true believers, but many were there for a sense of belonging, driven by personal failures and misdirected anger. Maya identified those who could be turned, those who were having doubts, and those whose criminal activities made them vulnerable to pressure. She began planting seeds of discord, carefully worded suggestions that made members question their leaders' motives. The dismantling began with their finances. Anonymous tips led state tax authorities to examine their charitable status. Business licenses held by key members came under scrutiny. Building code violations were reported at their meeting places. Each action was untraceable, but the cumulative effect was devastating. Next came their communications. Their secure servers experienced mysterious failures, copying sensitive conversations to law enforcement. Private messages between leaders were leaked, exposing financial misconduct and personal betrayals. Members began receiving evidence of their leaders' hypocrisy, proof that those preaching racial purity were secretly profiting from minority-owned businesses. Maya orchestrated each revelation like a symphony of destruction. Bank accounts were frozen due to suspected money laundering. Business partners, fear of public exposure, severed ties. Local politicians, once quietly supportive, now publicly denounced them. The society's carefully constructed facade began crumbling. Their membership scattered as pressure mounted. Some, facing criminal charges, turned informant. Others, their reputations at risk, publicly renounced their affiliation. The younger members, those Maya had identified as salvageable, found themselves receiving job offers and educational opportunities that provided a way out. Trevor McKnight, the society's leader, called an emergency meeting at their compound. Maya watched through high-powered optics as panic spread through their ranks. The leadership was turning on itself, each faction accusing others of betrayal. That's when she made her move. Walking into their compound alone, Maya carried no weapons. She didn't need them. Instead, she brought files, recordings, and irrefutable evidence of their crimes. The security cameras captured everything as she calmly laid out their options: surrender to federal authorities or watch their lives systematically destroyed. McKnight, his face contorted with rage and disbelief, recognized her from surveillance photos. "You're that woman from Maple Drive." "But I am," Maya replied, her voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "And you made a mistake thinking you could break me." The confrontation lasted exactly 17 minutes. Maya never raised her voice, never made a threatening move. She didn't have to. The evidence she presented was damning: financial fraud, hate crimes, conspiracy. But it was her presence that truly shattered them. The calm, unshakable confidence of someone who had faced far worse enemies than them. The legal resolution unfolded over the next 3 months. Federal prosecutors, armed with Maya's meticulously gathered evidence, built an airtight case. The Pure Heritage Society's leadership faced multiple federal charges: hate crimes, conspiracy, financial fraud, and more. State charges followed, along with civil suits from their victims. Maya testified only once, her testimony precise and devastating. She spoke not just of the attack on her home, but of the broader pattern of harassment and intimidation. Her military background lent her words additional weight, forcing the jury to confront the irony of Americans attacking a decorated veteran. The convictions came swiftly. McKnight and his inner circle received lengthy federal sentences. Lesser members faced various charges based on their involvement, but Maya's true victory wasn't just in the punishments, it was in the exposure. The society's complete records became public, revealing the hollowness of their ideology and the corruption of their leaders. Civil forfeitures stripped them of their assets. The compound was seized, with plans to convert it into a community center. Their business fronts were dissolved, their meeting places shuttered. The organization that had taken years to build was dismantled in months. But perhaps most satisfying was the educational trust fund created from seized assets, specifically designated for minority students in the community. Maya made sure that every dollar they had spent spreading hate would now be used to promote understanding and opportunity. Justice, she knew, wasn't just about punishment, it was about transformation. Spring arrived with a renewal that seemed almost symbolic. Where hate had tried to destroy Maya's garden, the community came together to rebuild something even more beautiful. On a bright Saturday morning, dozens of neighbors arrived with tools, plants, and determination. Children carried watering cans while their parents tilled the poisoned soil, replacing it with fresh earth rich with possibility. Mrs. Chen brought heritage seeds from her grandmother's garden in Taiwan. The Rodriguez family contributed desert plants from their native Arizona. Dr. Patterson, whose ancestors had been enslaved on Georgia plantations, shared cotton seeds passed down through generations, not as a symbol of oppression, but of resilience and redemption. The garden became a living metaphor for their community. Different plants, different traditions, all growing together in harmony. Maya watched as former strangers became friends, sharing stories and techniques from their various cultural backgrounds. Even families who had initially stayed distant from the controversy now joined in, realizing that community wasn't just about sharing space, it was about sharing purpose. The rebuilding extended beyond Maya's property. Other families who had faced harassment began receiving support to repair damage and install security systems. But more importantly, emotional walls began coming down. People who had lived as neighbors for years finally became true community members, looking out for each other, sharing resources, and standing united against any hint of hatred. Maya's house underwent its own transformation. Where hate symbols had once marred the walls, local artists painted murals celebrating diversity and strength. The front porch, rebuilt and expanded, became an even more welcoming space for community gatherings. Solar panels replaced the damaged roof, a symbol of looking forward, not back. The rebuilding wasn't just physical. Community watch programs evolved into friendship networks. Regular cultural exchange dinners began, where families shared not just food but stories and traditions. The neighborhood started a scholarship fund for local youth, emphasizing community service and understanding across cultural boundaries. But as her garden bloomed again, Maya found herself reflecting on the journey. Her military career had taught her how to fight enemies, but this experience had shown her how to build allies. The same precision and patience she'd used in combat had served to strengthen her community rather than destroy an opponent. The hate group had tried to isolate her, but they'd instead created connections that crossed all boundaries. They'd attempted to destroy her home, but had inadvertently helped build something far stronger, a community bound together not by fear or hatred, but by shared purpose and mutual respect. Watching neighborhood children playing together in her restored garden, Maya thought about cycles of violence and healing. Her military training had taught her dozens of ways to harm, but her life had taught her the infinitely more valuable lesson of how to heal. The skills she'd used to dismantle the hate group were important, but the skills she now used to build community were essential. The greatest victory, she often told visitors who asked about her experience, isn't in defeating those who hate, but in proving why they were wrong to hate in the first place. Every flower that blooms in this garden is a testament to that truth. To those reading this story, remember, hate seeks to isolate us, to make us believe we're alone. But in every community, there are more people ready to build than destroy, more hands willing to help than harm. The choice we face isn't whether to fight or flee from hate, it's how to transform it into an opportunity for unity. Take action in your own community. Start small, a shared meal, a helping hand, a moment of understanding. Look for ways to build bridges where others see only walls. Remember that every garden starts with a single seed, and every community grows stronger with each connection we nurture. Together, we can create something beautiful from the ashes of hatred. Like and subscribe to hear more stories of communities coming together, and share your own experiences in the comments below. Because when we stand united, hate can never truly win.